Aphorism 244. There was a time when it was usual to call the Germans profound, and this was meant as a term of distinction. Now, when the most successful type of the new Germanism thirsts after quite different honors, and perhaps feels that anything profound lacks dash, and it is almost timely and patriotic to doubt whether that commendation of former days was not founded by self-deception. Whether German profundity is not at bottom something different and worse, and something which, thanks to be God, one is on the verge of successfully getting rid of it. Let us therefore try to learn anew about German profundity. All that is required is a little vivisection of the German soul. The German soul is above all manifold, of diverse origins, put together and superimposed, rather than actually constructed. The reason for that is its source. A German who would make bold to say, "Two souls, alas, within my bosom dwell," would err every wildly from the truth. More correctly, he would fall short of the truth by a large number of souls. As a people of the most tremendous mixture and mingling of races, perhaps even with a preponderance of the pre-Aryan element, as the people of the middle, in every sense, the Germans are more incomprehensible, more comprehensive, more full of contradictions, more unknown, more incalculable, more surprising, even more frightening to themselves than other people are. They elude definition, and are, for that reason alone, the despair of the French. It is the characteristic of the Germans that the question, "What is German?" never dies out among them. Kotzebue certainly knew his Germans well enough. "We are known," they cried to him jubilantly, and sobbed, too, thought she knew them. Jean Paul knew what he was doing when he declared himself instead and in the incense by fetched, mysterious but patriotic flatteries and exaggerations. But it is likely that Goethe thought otherwise of the German than Jean Paul, even though he agreed with that what Goethe really thought of the Germans. But there are many things around him about which he never expressed himself clearly. In his whole life long he knew how to maintain a subtle silence. He had no doubt of good reason. What is certain is that it was not the wars of liberation which made him look up more cheerfully, any more than it was the French Revolution, the event on account of which he rethought his Faust. Indeed, the whole problem of man was the appearance of Napoleon. There exist statements by Goethe in which, as if he had from another country, he condemns with impatient severity that which the Germans take pride in, the celebrated German Gemüt. He once defined as indulgence of others' weaknesses and his own. Was he wrong? It is the characteristic of the Germans that one is seldom wholly wrong about them. The German soul has corridors and interconnecting corridors in it. There are caves, hidden places, dungeons in it. Its disorder possesses much of the fascination of the mysterious. The German is acquainted with the hidden paths to chaos, and as everything loves its symbol, the caller, damp, and dismal of German love to cloud, and that is all obscure, becoming the uncertain of the unformed, shifting, growing of every kind he feels to be profound. The German himself is not, he is becoming, he is developing. Development is thus the truly German discovery and the lucky shot in the great domain of philosophical formulas. A ruling concept which, in the concert with German beer and German music, it is at work at the Germanization of all Europe. Foreigners are astonished and drawn by the enigmas which the contradictory nature at the bottom of the German soul propounds to them, which Hegel reduced to a system and Richard Wagner finally set to music. Good natured and malicious, which a juxtaposition, nonsensical in respect of any other people, is unfortunately too often justified in Germany. You have only to live among Swabians for a while. The ponderousness of the German scholar, his social instability, gets there frightfully well with any inner rope walking and easy boldness before which all the gods have learned fear. If you want the German soul demonstrated ad oculus, you have only to look into the German taste, into German arts and customs. What boorish indifference to taste! How the noblest and the commonest here stand side by side! How disorderly, how wealthy this whole physical household is. The German drags his soul. He drags everything he experiences. He digests his events badly. He is never done with him. German profundity is often only a sluggish digestion, and just as all chronic invalids, all dyspeptics, have an inclination for comforts, so the German loves openness and uprightness. How comfortable it is to open and upright! Perhaps it is the most dangerous and successful disguise the German knows how to use today. This confiding, accommodating, cards on the table German honesty. It is the real art which aids him who could still go far. The German lets himself go, and as he does, so he gazes out with the true blue empty German eyes, and other countries at once confound him with his dressing gown. I meant to say, whatever German profundity may be, and when we are quite by ourselves, we still perhaps permit ourselves to laugh at it. We would do well to hold its appearance in good name and respect henceforth too, and not to sell former old reputation as the profound nation too cheaply for Prussian dash and Berlin wit and sand. It is clever for a people to be considered, to get itself considered profound, clumsy, good-natured, honest, not clever. It might even be profound. Finally, one not ought to be ashamed of one's own name. It is not for nothing one is called das Trüchtwelt, das Fortschritt. Aphorism 245. The good old days are gone, and Mozart they sang themselves out. How fortunate are we that this Requiem still speaks to us, that his good company, his tender enthusiasm, his childlike delight, and connoisseur and ornaments, his politeness of the heart, his longing for the graceful, the enamored, the dancing, the tearful, his faith in the South may still appeal to some residue in us. Also, some day it will all be gone. But who can doubt that understanding and taste for Beethoven will, will be gone first? For Beethoven was only the closest cadence of the transition of style and stylistic branch, and not as Mozart was, the closing cadence of a great centuries-old European taste. Beethoven is the intermediary between an old mellow soul that is constantly crumbling and a future over-young soul that is continually arriving. Upon his music there lies the twilight of eternal loss and eternal extravagant hope, the same light in which Europe lay bathed when the dream of Rousseau, when it danced around the Revolution's tree of liberty, and finally almost worshipped before Napoleon. But how quickly this almost feeling became a fading away. How hard is it today even to know this feeling, now strange to our ears as it sounds the language of Rousseau, Schiller, Shelley, Byron, and whom, together, the same European destiny that Beethoven knew how to sing found its way into words. However, music came afterwards belongs to Romanticism. What is to say to a movement which was, historically speaking, even brighter, even more fleeting, even more superficial than the great interlude, the transition of Europe from Rousseau to Napoleon, and to the rise of democracy, Weber. But what are Rauschniks and Oberon to us today, or Marschner's Hans Heiling and Vampire, or even Wagner's Tannhäuser? It is dead, or if not yet forgotten music. All this music of Romanticism was, moreover, insufficiently noble, insufficiently musical, to maintain itself anywhere but in the theatre and before the mob. It was from the very first second-rate music to which genuine musicians paid little regard. It was otherwise with Felix Mendelssohn. That Heilbronn master was who, on account of his lighter, purer, happier soul, speedily honored and just as speedily forgotten, as the beautiful German music itself has. But as for Schumann, who took things seriously and who was also taken seriously from the first, he was the last to found the school, who did not who we do not know now, think in a piece of good fortune, a relief, a liberation, that this shaman romanticism has been overcome. Shaman, feeling into the Saxon Switzerland of his soul, his nature itself, thither, have Jean Paul, not at all like Beethoven, not at all Byronic. His music for Manfred is a mistake and misunderstanding to the point of injustice. Staumann, with his taste, which was fundamentally a pity taste, that is to say, a dangerous inclination, doubly dangerous among Germans, for quite lyricism and drunkenness of feeling, continually going aside, shyly withdrawing and retiring, a noble effeminate, delighting in nothing but an ominous wail and woe, a kind of girl and Nail me Tarek from the first. This shaman was already a merely German event in music, no longer a European event, as Beethoven was, as to an even greater extent Mozart had been. In him German music was threatened with its greater danger, that of losing the voice for the soul of Europe, and sinking into a merely natural affair. Aphorism 246. What a torment books written in German are for me, who has a third ear. How disgusted he stands beside the slowly turning swamp of sounds without the resonance, of rhymes that do not dance, which the Germans call a book. Not to mention the German who reads books, how lazily, how reluctantly, how boldly he reads, how many Germans know, or think they ought to know, that there is art in every good sentence, art that must be grasped if the sentence is to be understood. A misunderstanding of its tempo, for example, in the sentence itself, is misunderstood. That one must be in no doubt about the syllables that demand the rhythm, that one should feel the disruption of a too severe symmetry as intentional and as something attractive, that one should lend to a refined and patient ear to every staccato, every bravado, that one should divine the meaning in the sequence of vowels and it of diphthongs, and how delicately and richly they can color and recolor one another through the order in which they come. Who among book reading Germans has sufficient goodwill to acknowledge such demands and duties and to listen to so much art and intention in language? In the end, one simply has no ear for it, and so the greatest contrasts in style go unheard, and the subtlest artistry is squandered as if on the deaf. These were my thoughts, when I noticed how two masters of the art of prose were clumsily and unexpectedly confused with one another, one from whom words fall cold and hostile, as from the roof of a damp cavern. He calculates on the heavy dullness of their sound and echo, and another, who handles his language like a subtle blade, and feels from his arm down to his toes the perilous delight of the quivering, over-sharp steel that wants to bite, hiss, cut. Aphorism 247. How little German style has to do with sound in the ears is shown by the fact that precisely our good musicians write badly. The German does not read aloud, does not read for the ear, but merely for his eyes. He was put he has put his ears away in the drawer. In antiquity, when a man read, he did it very seldom. He read to himself aloud, and indeed a loud voice. It was a matter for surprise if anyone read quietly, and people secretly asked themselves why did they do so. In a loud voice, that is to say, with all the crescendos, inflections, variations of tone, and changes of tempo in which the ancient public would take pleasure. In those days, the rules of written style were the same as those of spoken style, and these rules depended in part of the astonishing development, the refined requirements of ear and larynx, in part of the strength, endurance, and power of ancient lungs. A period is, in the sense in which the ancients understood it, above all a physiological whole, inasmuch as it is composed by a single breath. Periods much appear with Demosthenes or Cicero, rising twice, even thrice, and sinking twice, and within a single breath. These are delights for men of antiquity, who knew from their own schooling how to value the virtue in them, the rarity and difficulty of the delivery of such a period. We have really no right to the grand period, we moderns, we who are short of breath in every sense. For these ancients were one and all themselves rhetorical, consequently connoisseurs, and consequently critics, and so to say drove their orators to extremes. In the same way, in the last century, when all Italians and Italiens knew how to sing, virtuosity in singing, and therewith also the art of melody, attained its height with them. In Germany, however, there were, as was ultimately recently, when a kind of platform eloquence began shyly and heavily to flop its young wings. Really, but one species of public and fairly artistic oratory that, that from the pulpit. The preacher was the only one in Germany who knew what a syllable, what a word weighs, how a sentence strikes, rises, falls, runs to an end. He alone had a conscience in his ears, oft, often enough a bad conscience. For there is a lack of reason. For there is no lack of reasons why it is precisely the German who rarely achieves proficiency in oratory, or almost always achieves it too late. The masterpiece of German prose is therefore, as it is to be expected, the masterpiece of its great preacher. The Bible has been the best German book hitherto. Compared with Luther's Bible, almost everything else is merely literature, a thing that has not grown up in Germany, and therefore has not taken and does not take root in German ears, as the Bible has done. Welcome, everyone, to a long-winded version of Nietzsche's critique of the Germans still in the fatherland. But I've invited this man, Russ, again.
Hello.
What's your initial thoughts of his criticisms of Germany at that time?
Well, I actually I'd like you to go because I'm going to be fairly critical of Nietzsche, I think, here. So I don't want to start with that. So tell me what you
Yeah.
think.
His criticism of Germany is how the Romantics reacted to the Enlightenment, and involves the criticism of the Enlightenment from the French. So, AKA, it's this breeding pathology of now that we're once solemn and a logical and mental state because of how Nietzsche saw how Nietzsche saw them use conscious as a kernel for existence, and that the body was neglected afterwards. That's why there were famine. That's why he said in multiple works of his that the body is a famished, monstrous, and unused character and play. So from how this German soul is manifolded from the French or the dull and bullish French that influenced Germans, it shows this new Germanism which thirsts quite different in honors and perhaps feels anything that lacks of dash to say, something that's become, to quote him, almost timely and patriotic, whether for former days, which has now been founded in self-deception. This profundity, as he sees German profundity, is self-deception in his eyes.
Yeah. So what I'll say about 244 and 245 is going to be a little bit different than what I say about 246 and 247 because he has a very different voice in these two and those two. And I will say, but there's a link, and as far as I'm concerned, the link is pejorative. I'll start by saying I what I take away, what I like about 244, and I guess and 245 is how the everything and nothing, the dynamism, these things are very important to me in particular, right? I don't like to be caught in a label. If you knew me, I don't like to be called any one thing. So to adapt, to be adaptable, to be labeled as labelless, to be in flux and change, the is a good thing. But he says all of this, and it isn't critique, but the issue is that he's talking about all he's kind of making these he's speaking about these groups in kind of vast generalities, and I wasn't alive then. I can't tell you like exactly what it was like, but to me it feels like somebody, kind of, it feels like the philosopher off to the side, it, you know what, it feels like I have a transcript of, like, he's on a call with his friend and he's just talking, right? Because he doesn't even make many value judgments in 244 and 245. He's merely, he's presenting, the world as he sees it, right? He's saying that this is the case, right? But he doesn't really say that this is better than this or this should be done in this way. Not directly. Now, if I were to read into it more, and because I can look at his larger body of work and know who Nietzsche is, I can kind of work with that. But at the same time, I find it difficult without making any value judgments. He goes on to speak about what music is, and what Beethoven is, and the way that was received by this group or that. And I don't really care, right? Until there's like a value judgment, until you say more, right, about Mozart, like more, say more about what you're talking about, and propose something rather than just saying this general group does it this way and this general group does it this way. I'm 200 years freaking, I don't care. Those groups don't matter to me, right? And what you say of, the German condition is that certainly now we wouldn't say that about the Germans. If anything, I would say that about maybe Americans are more dynamic. But now that comes from Germany, right? But again, other than him saying it here, am I so certain that there wasn't some French or Scandinavian influence? I don't know. I can't trace all those lines. And because he doesn't even make a value judgment, I can't even agree or disagree with him. So that's my criticism of 244 and 5.
Well, we'll reframe it to how his concern, vitriolic concern of the German music, how it was reforming to now this war of liberation from the French Revolution. We can translate that to modernity of how, say, you and I reacting to pop and rap.
But again, how would we react to pop and rap? I'm not sure that I know for sure. It might depend on the song,
In the sense of that I don't hear pop and rap because I'm a metalhead.
right? But you could be in America as someone that likes rap. And then you wouldn't be in a category of American or German or anything like that, right?
Hmm.
And we say that of all Germans. Can he say that of all Germans? Who's to say? He's speaking again about groups, and I, other than him saying it, I can't really say anything about it because I wasn't there. I can't disagree or agree. I really don't know.
Well, in this sense, he's concerned of the value sentiments, well, the values and morals that are being presented in the music that's eliciting the emotions. Say, for example, Wagner's Percival, where Wagner he he was solely concentrated on the pre-moral era, aka the Hellenic era, in the Volt guys of Norse mythology in his works, aka the Valkyrie. That was eliciting the old age of morality. Now, because he's transitioned from reading Hegel, which Nietzsche criticizes that Hegel was now the systematic moralist to the Germans, and that translated to Wagner, because Wagner revalued and overcame himself in a negative sense in Nietzsche's eyes. Because the play of Percival is preaching what Nietzsche is opposing.
Yeah. Uh, what can I say about that? Yes. That I don't have my problem is that I read this as again a transcript. I can't I just say yes to everything. Okay, go on, go on. That's how I feel. Like he's just telling me a story, and I don't disagree with it or agree with it, and I keep coming back to that. And there's some other things. He speaks to the power of the main thing that I want to talk about. If I was there with him, is when he speaks to the flux of everything and nothing. That's kind of cool. Right now, you're talking about something I want to talk about, right? But then you go on to name all these categories, and yet you're kind of criticizing them to begin with, yet you're using them now to describe all these people. And you speak so much to I would say you speak so much to what is German, yet you say that the German condition should be or rather is a flux thing, right? A mixture of this and that, and an adaptability that is watery.
Hmm. You could say too with the criticism of Germans, say for example the classical work ethic where there was minimal hours, but among that hours it was production. Say with Martin Luther, once he arrived and became the Protestant work ethic of you're doing this for the duty of a higher being.
Yeah. Now we're talking about some cool stuff as you start to get into that. Yeah, continue. Go ahead.
And that's what I'm reminiscing or sensing here with Nietzsche is that how the Germans impacted both on a laborious economic scale, say with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and a systematic psychological, moral, and physiological scale too, in the realm of psychology and sociology with Kant and Hegel.
Yeah. Um, I can hear that, but I want him to say more about it. I can say things about it. I don't know though if I don't know if he would agree. Right? He's not here with me. Um, it's tough. for me. This one, this for me, one thing that I want to say about 244 and 245. I'm going to take a little bit of a different. I'm going to have some other things to say at 246 and 7. But with this, the whole time, I thought I wish I was reading Kierkegaard right now because it was just a lot of words. It was just a lot of words, and it what compared to. And again, for the audience, I'm a big Kierkegaard fan, and
Yeah.
and with him, it's like every line that I'm reading, I'm thinking, right? Like that's great, And I was reading him before I read Nietzsche, so I guess that I had a juxtaposition there. But I go from these lines that are actually, I'll move into my criticism of 246. He goes on to speak about the importance of lines, right? Like and words and the value of the inflections
Language. Yeah.
and language as a whole. Yet, what did he just write? Did he pay attention to all of these lines and add inflection and staccato and all that? Did he make this beautiful? Because it was pretty dry to me. Like,
He was.
it's like what you're talking about how these H lines should be chosen very carefully, and then I look up and I say, but who can doubt that the understanding of and the taste for Beethoven will be gone even earlier? He was, in fact, only the final chord of a stylistic transit. Are you choosing those words very carefully? Right? What inflection am I missing here? If you were orating.
You could say he's committing the same quote. The great contrast in style go unheard, and the subtlest artistry is squandered as if on the deaf.
Yeah.
So with 246, he says this too. I remember with Nietzsche, same with Kierkegaard, they're both ironic and sarcastic individuals to heart because of their play and their playful naivety and teasing at times. He personally says it too that at and a understanding a misunderstanding of its tempo, for example, and the sentence itself is misunderstood. That one must be in no doubt about the syllables that determine the rhythm. That one should feel the disruption of a too severe symmetry as intentional and as something attractive. That one would lead to staccato, the patient ear for staccato, rubato, etc., 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 etc. And he compares this to how the dull nature of reading books and being absorbed in these books are in the German sufficient goodwill sense.
Is he not critiquing the German who is reading a book yet not understanding? Again, he's talking about a people here, a group that I don't know, so it's hard. I just have difficulty on like speaking about that.
Mm-hmm.
But um, it feels like he's
Expand
being.
expand that mind, not solely from the Germans, but on an international scale. Stay with the hoi polloi.
So all people, we could say.
Yeah.
So that's easier for me to work with because I don't have to understand a social group or a nation state, hundreds of years ago that I have no. But yeah, if we look at that as people, um, that's an easier category to work with. I just don't know if for him is that what do you think that's what he's saying? Is he saying people or is he saying Germans?
At his time, Germans, but for the emphasis of the audience in front of us, I im- I improvise people or the majority, which he would agree immediately of the majority is an effect, but because this is part 8 of peoples and fatherlands, that title of part 8 shows it's not solely of Germans.
Yeah. I like to think on a broader level about the work. It's like, oop, uh, I can't, I can't remember this. It's in this section. I just don't remember exactly where it's at. But, when he gets into immortality and basically, while the masses, are striving for that, they can be controlled. That's pretty. That I guess we can relate that here. We can say we can look at his kind of the larger vision of this whole section, right? Which is wrapped up much easier in by Darth Bane when he says, um, the weak drag the strong down to a level of mediocrity, right? And prevent them from really thriving. And and so if I look at that as part of this larger thing, rather than isolating kind of these aphorisms, then I can say, okay, so now we're talking about those people that are dragging the strong down, right? How are they how they're doing it, right? And this one of those ways, right? To be looking at art incorrectly and understanding it incorrectly. Um, I mean, what do you think? Is that a fair reading? If that is that what he's doing? Is he just being critical of those
Hmm.
weak?
It's he's you're correct. He's critiquing either emphatically or ironically, or both in this sense, including himself, because he was once in that participant. Um, he's criticizing the philosopher. And I've said this before, but what Nietzsche sees as the philosopher in this sense is a passive spectator of art. Now, there's another word for it, philosopher. In this, in that context of philosopher, it's the active creator of art. So that's where the distinction is. And he, in this context, is criticizing the first philosopher of passively spectating art and analyzing brush per brush or stone stone line per stone carving of the material itself.
And and then he goes on. Well, he says at one point, right? This is taken in and appreciated, and then moved on from in a way that nothing has changed, right? Nothing is um, no value was added, right, by that the type of digestion, rather than I suppose what he would consider himself to be doing, which is adding something to this equation. Um, Other than over analysis, I would say I don't know that. I guess you could say he is with using sarcasm here. Um, I guess he's adding, but he has to say it all to highlight the effect, right, of these passive consumers of art.
Yeah.
Um, so I can accept that. I can accept that, right? And then to go on to say that, and then to make examples. I think 246 and 7 are a bit better because he's making value judgments.
Hmm.
He's working with things that I can agree with now, rather than
Hmm.
just say go on. So he sets them up. He says this isn't the way it should be. So we're to kind of take on the implication that he thinks the opposite, probably, right? Um, and then he would be showing us here what it looks like to do what he's talking about. Um, so maybe through the progression in that way, and then especially continuing on. So we go from the music, we go from writing to music, and then well, we I think we get to the Bible. That line that I really
Well,
like at the end there.
hmm well, and before
Uh,
the Bible, it was or an oratory.
right, yeah, yeah, oratory. Now I like what he's saying there. Except for like I said, I like to be able to say like, what are you doing here? But with an ironic kind of reading here, I don't know that that's what he's doing. I mean maybe he is. I don't think he's being. I don't think he's trying to show us that by the choice of his words. I think he's telling us that, and not and it's not that delicious. I don't think he's trying to say Do you see what I mean? I mean, do you think that he's writing the poor, like what I would say is the poor way on purpose in 244 and 5 before he gets into that? Do you think that he was giving an example that he would
Or
then play with?
he's participating in it. Then,
Okay. You think it's
then
intentional?
yes, it deliberate by participating in it, and then slowly showing in us in a now perilous delight. What he would say now in language, his language like a supple blade, and feels like from his arm down to his toes the perilous delight of the quivering over sharp steel that wants to bite, hiss, and cut. That's what he's now describing in the next aphorism, but what the quiet lyricism and drunkenness of feeling he associates with German soul or New Germanism.
Okay. If he's doing that, then I think it's cool if he's doing that. It's kind of it just seems like he's droning on when he's speaking about all these things. But if he's doing it intentionally, then that's pretty brilliant. Um, and there's I think there's some evidence for that, given that he moves from this droning to something poignant and with value judgment and with a bit more poetry. Um, I would have preferred the way Kierkegaard would have written it. but
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 hey man, Kierkegaard's irrelevant.
okay. So I can give him that. I see. The thing is, I do like this section. Like that my Darth Bane quote. I like what he's saying there. And I guess you can tie this to the whole. It's just it feels like a long way to say it. It feels like I think he's smarter than this. Is what I'm trying to say. I
He
I,
is.
I yeah. So I didn't like it that much. Like this is one of my critiques. It's like, okay, if you are showing me by presenting me something kind of droll, can't you just say it better? Like I don't know. Like it felt boring to me. Um and then 6 and 7 get less boring, right? I can agree with that. And then I can also say that as part of the larger piece, it's less and less boring, right? As you attach it to the larger work. But he's again the way that he's speaking about choosing words carefully and oratory and all that. It's like I just feel like he didn't choose all these words very carefully. Like I think if I could go back in time and say like, are you sure about you? Let's say you have to cut this down into something more like I tell you, I like brevity, right? There's genius in brevity, right? In condensing philosophy. And I feel like I could go back in time and say, "You're brilliant. Do you think you can say this in 500 words?" And I'm sure he could. I'm sure he could, and it would be
There's
great.
there's one example in Twilight of the Idols of the apparent versus true world. He succinctly refutes um the apparent, aka the physical world, and a true world, the metaphysical world, in the realm of Platonic, Kantian, Christian, and ecclesiastical metaphysics, aka something being static and fixed. He criticizes that in like 200 words less.
Yeah, I mean that's great. I can. Well, think about it. My favorite work of Nietzsche's is Zarathustra, right? Because I can read each line and be like, "Ooh, okay," like and he declares that his magnum opus, which I appreciate. I love that work. This is the opposite of that.
Well, remember, Beyond Good and Evil is Zarathustra, but 10 times weaker.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it certainly is gives us more to read. But that's good. And there's more to talk about. There's if everything that's okay. I just it's just tough for me. And he's talking about again all these things that don't translate through time very well. Again, he goes on and on about Germans, and then speaks about the French and the effects of cultural blending and the way that that's received, and then the way that he thinks it should be received. But man, that's a lot of words, right? Again, and then he critiques these philosophers. He's critiquing them, he's always doing that. And it's like, but I just want to know. I really don't want to hear his critiques. I just want him to stay in a positively charged area, like in Zarathustra the entire time, where he's actually like saying things, right, about the world that I wouldn't have ever thought. I love when he's in that space. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just have to be a bit critical here. At least of these aphorisms. Again, I like the section. The section's brilliant. But these particular, I think you go through and you have your guests and you have different ones. It's like I read this and I was like, well, I do like being formless, right? That's cool. That's me. I like that the flux, change, embrace change, right? Don't get tied down into something. That's all cool, but it's a lot of words to say that. So I knew that I was like, oh man, I wish I got a different aphorism. That's what I was thinking after I read, when you told me which ones, because remember I told you I read up to like 252, and I was like, oh, see, what I did when he told me the ones that we're doing is I went ahead and I was like, well, that didn't satisfy. Let me continue, right? And as I continued, it becomes more clear. There's certainly more to work with. But I think, given this episode in this format is 244 to 247, when I finished, I said, I think I'm just going to have to be really critical if we're just talking about, this section. So, but I like 6 and 7 more, what I'll say is that last line is great, right? Again, I'll read it, right? It is appropriate, therefore, that the masterwork of German prose is the masterwork of its greatest preacher. Up to this point, the Bible has been the best German book. In comparison with Luther's Bible, almost everything is mere literature, that's cute. Something that did not grow in Germany and hence also did not grow and does not grow in German hearts, as the Bible has. That's brilliant, right? Especially because I like Kierkegaard, right? And the Bible is very, very relevant. There's this new age of, I think we're getting away from it now, but this whole, it's actually it's what Nietzsche's talking about, a false intellectualism that says the Bible's stupid, because there's not a bearded man in the sky that casts lightning bolts with the, silver golden streets and diamond gates. You guys are dumb. And then they throw out the whole work when it's the most important stories that have been passed down through all generations and preserved, right? It's like, I think Nietzsche understands that, right? Like that's why he's speaking about it, because as opposed to these others that are listed, he says that's the best German book, and that's something I wouldn't have said. That is brilliant. I would have laughed at. I like that.
It involves morality of how it's a fundamental but adaptive tool in the sense of symbols, narratives, doctrines, and literature,
Mm-hmm.
and to a degree, narratives.
I actually like some of that the most that he's saying about because I agree. So much is lost in if I could hear him say this, I bet I would have liked it more, right? Like if I could hear the poignant emphasis on certain syllables and diphthongs, I think I could probably get on board with him a little bit more. It's just some of these, I get 5 sentences in a row about what people are thinking of each other, and I just don't care about that, right? Like, what do you think about it? And so that's kind of where I end up with that, and so I feel myself just scanning. Okay, and I'm getting through Beethoven and Napoleon and the Germans and he says it in long form, and then there's something with a period that I can think about. Um, so yeah, yeah, that's right where I stand.
To clarify, Zarathustra is his positive philosophy. Everything after Zarathustra is his negative portion of his philosophy. He
Yeah,
justified this with Ecce Homo, his autobiography, where he says the first part of Beyond Good and Evil that he said, well, part one of Ecce Homo, where he's discussing Beyond Good and Evil. He said, I've discussed everything positive of my philosophy in Zarathustra. Now
yeah,
time for the critiquing of modernity and arts, science, morality, etc., etc.
yeah. But again, as somebody that knows me, I often say stay in a positive space. You can have, so many people associate emotions as negative, right? As a sad being bad. And when you're sad, you need to quickly become happy or else you're somehow failing, some state that you promised yourself. And, I think Nietzsche would agree with me here. I think, but he goes on to stay in that negatively charged space a lot, which is, in other words, it's good to be, if you're sad, let it be, let it be as part of the human experience. Um, so it's like, I mean, it's tough to for me to critique just because I think my own philosophy doesn't like to do it. Um, um, but that's why I end up liking Zarathustra so much, and I also a lot of that wasn't meant to be published, which I can appreciate as well, right? So I can take that into consideration, but again, one step back, if we look at the parts, is brilliant, really. I just don't like all the steps that he makes.
The That's why I said at the beginning it's the long-winded dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. I yeah. I don't know where to go from there on two after 277. I
I'll, I'll I'll simply say appreciate everyone for watching. Appreciate you, Russ, for accepting the invitation again.
yeah.
Amor Fati, love, your fate.